Imagine this. You've been told your whole life that capitalism is the ultimate engine of prosperity, a system that rewards innovation and hard work, while socialism is a recipe for stagnation and collapse. It's a clean, comforting myth, one that dominates headlines, history books, and dinner table debates. But what if that story is dangerously incomplete? What if capitalism's greatest triumphs have often hidden devastating human costs, and socialism's bold experiments sometimes delivered rapid progress that free markets couldn't match? The brutal truth is that neither system has ever existed in pure form, and their real-world track records defy the simplistic narratives we've inherited. Today we're shattering that myth wide open, and by the end, you'll be left with a lingering mystery. In an era of mounting U.S. debt crisis 2025 and potential Canada housing crash, why do we keep repeating the same economic patterns that have failed us before? To truly grasp what worked and what didn't in the clash between capitalism and socialism, we must step back from the ideological battle lines and examine the actual historical record. This isn't about picking winners or losers based on political bias. It's about dissecting systems through the lens of outcomes: growth, equality, stability, and human well-being. We'll journey through more than 2 centuries of economic evolution, from the smoky factories of the Industrial Revolution to the digital economies of today, uncovering how these ideologies shaped nations, fortunes, and lives. Along the way, I'll tease 3 massive twists that challenge everything you thought you knew. First twist: socialist policies, often dismissed as inefficient, sometimes accelerated industrialization faster than capitalist competition ever could. Second twist: capitalism's unchecked pursuit of profit has repeatedly led to financial resets that wiped out generations of wealth. And third twist: the most successful economies aren't purely capitalist or socialist, they're hybrids that borrow from both. But even those are now facing a potential dollar collapse in the coming years. Here on Cash Historian, we dig deeper than anyone else into these hidden financial histories. If you're loving this exploration of what really drives economies, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one. We've got more revelations coming that could change how you see the U.S. debt crisis 2025. Let's begin our chronological deep dive with clear chapter announcements to guide us through this complex terrain. Chapter 1. The Origins, the birth of modern capitalism in the 19th century. The story starts in the early 1800s, amid the roar of steam engines and the clang of iron in Britain's industrial heartlands. Capitalism, defined broadly as a system where private individuals own the means of production and markets allocate resources through supply, demand, and profit motives, exploded onto the scene. Cities like Manchester transformed from sleepy towns into bustling hubs of textile mills and factories. Productivity skyrocketed. Britain's GDP per capita nearly doubled between 1820 and 1870. Entrepreneurs like James Watt and Andrew Carnegie embodied the capitalist spirit, innovating technologies that powered global trade and lifted millions from agrarian poverty. But here's a delayed reveal. This rise wasn't without shadows. Factory workers, including children as young as 5, toiled 14-hour days in hazardous conditions, with wages barely covering subsistence. The wealth gap widened dramatically. The top 10% captured over 50% of national income in Victorian England. Rhetorical question: what if the very system praised for creating abundance was also sowing the seeds of its own discontent? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels watched this unfold and penned their Communist Manifesto in 1848, arguing that capitalism's internal contradictions would inevitably lead to revolution. Yet, as the century closed, capitalism spread across Europe and America, promising unlimited growth. But that promise was about to face its first major test, one that would force the world to question if free markets alone could sustain society. Chapter 2. The Rise. Socialist revolutions and early experiments in the early 20th century. As capitalism matured, its flaws became impossible to ignore, paving the way for socialist alternatives. Socialism, at its core, advocates for collective or state ownership of production to distribute wealth more equitably and eliminate exploitation. The pivotal moment came with the Russian Revolution in 1917, where Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks seized power and implemented the world's first large-scale socialist economy. Private property was abolished, industries nationalized, and central planning replaced market forces. The results were mixed but undeniable in scope. The Soviet Union industrialized at a blistering pace, building thousands of factories and increasing steel production from 4 million tons in 1928 to 18 million tons by 1940 under Stalin's five-year plans. This rapid transformation turned a backward agrarian nation into a superpower capable of withstanding Nazi invasion during World War II. Meanwhile, in the capitalist West, the Great Depression of 1929 exposed vulnerabilities. Stock market crashes, bank failures, and unemployment rates soaring to 25% in the U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal introduced socialist-inspired elements like Social Security, public works, and labor protections, blending state intervention with market dynamics. Rhetorical question: could it be that socialism's structured approach provided stability where capitalism's chaos faltered? These early experiments hinted at hybrids, but as the mid-century approached, the ideological divide would sharpen, leading to a global showdown that revealed the true costs of each system. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point: The Cold War Clash and Systemic Crises in the Mid-20th Century. By the 1950s, the world split into capitalist and socialist blocs, with the Cold War serving as the ultimate test bed. In the capitalist sphere, the United States led a post-war boom, with GDP growth averaging 4% annually from 1948 to 1973. Innovations in consumer goods, automobiles, and suburbs created the American dream, lifting median family incomes by over 100%. Yet this golden age masked inequalities. Racial segregation and gender wage gaps persisted, and environmental degradation from unchecked industrial growth mounted. On the socialist side, the Soviet Union and its allies achieved remarkable feats: universal health care, free education, and full employment, with life expectancy rising from 44 years in 1926 to 70 by 1970. Eastern Europe's planned economies rebuilt war-torn infrastructure at speeds unmatched in the West. But cracks emerged. Bureaucratic inefficiencies led to shortages, and innovation stalled without market incentives. The 1956 Hungarian uprising highlighted dissent against rigid control. In the West, the 1973 oil crisis triggered stagflation, eroding faith in Keynesian capitalism. Rhetorical question: if both systems delivered progress, why did their breaking points feel so inevitable? As the 1970s ended, leaders like Deng Xiaoping in China began reforming socialism with market elements, setting the stage for a new era where pure ideologies gave way to pragmatic blends, but not without fresh turmoil on the horizon. Chapter 4. The Fallout: Neoliberal Reforms and Socialist Declines in the Late 20th Century. The 1980s marked a seismic shift as capitalism reinvented itself under neoliberalism. Figures like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher championed deregulation, privatization, and tax cuts, arguing that freeing markets from government shackles would unleash prosperity. The results were swift. Global trade exploded, stock markets soared, and the U.S. tech boom of the 1990s created trillion-dollar industries. GDP growth in OECD countries averaged 3%, and poverty rates in developing nations began declining. However, the fallout was profound. Inequality surged, with the top 1%'s income share doubling in the U.S. from 10% in 1980 to 20% by 2000. The 1987 Black Monday crash foreshadowed instability. For socialism, the late century was catastrophic. The Soviet Union's economy stagnated under Gorbachev's perestroika, leading to its 1991 collapse. Eastern Bloc nations faced hyperinflation and unemployment spikes during transitions to capitalism. China's hybrid model, blending state control with market openings, lifted 800 million out of poverty by the millennium, but at the cost of environmental disasters and worker exploitation. Rhetorical question: was the apparent victory of capitalism truly a win, or merely a delay of deeper systemic flaws? As we entered the 21st century, the lines blurred further, with capitalist giants adopting socialist safety nets. But the accumulating debt and inequalities hinted at an impending reckoning that no hybrid could fully escape. Chapter 5. The Failed Fixes: 21st Century Hybrids and Persistent Challenges. In the new millennium, pure capitalism and socialism faded into hybrids, but attempts to fix their flaws often exacerbated problems. The 2008 global financial crisis epitomized this. Deregulated capitalist banks in the U.S. bundled risky mortgages into toxic assets, leading to a meltdown that erased $10 trillion in global wealth. Governments responded with socialist-style bailouts, $700 billion in the U.S. TARP program, socializing losses while privatizing gains. Recovery was uneven, with quantitative easing inflating asset bubbles. In Europe, socialist-leaning welfare states like Greece faced debt crises, forcing austerity that shrank economies by 25%. China's state capitalism drove 10% annual growth from 2000 to 2010, but built up hidden debts exceeding 300% of GDP by 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic amplified failures. Capitalist supply chains fractured, while socialist command economies like Cuba struggled with shortages. Fixes like universal basic income pilots in Finland blended ideas, but global inequalities widened. The world's richest 1% captured 63% of new wealth since 2020. Rhetorical question. If hybrids were meant to solve the old problems, why do they now face the same cycles of boom and bust? As we approach the mid-2020s, these failed patches are unraveling, revealing patterns that echo history's warnings in stark modern terms. And now, let's ground this historical journey in the raw realities of today, drawing on the latest data from 2024 through 2025 to illuminate repeating cycles that could signal a financial reset on the horizon. As of December 2025, the United States national debt has surged to a staggering $38.4 trillion, up $2.23 trillion from the previous year alone, equivalent to about $6.12 billion added per day. This debt now approaches 140% of GDP, a level not seen since World War II, fueling concerns over a potential U.S. debt crisis 2025 that could trigger higher interest rates and slower growth. In Canada, household debt has climbed to $3.07 trillion as of the first quarter of 2025, with the debt-to-income ratio hitting 174.9%, driven largely by mortgages amid a fragile housing market. Canada's household debt relative to GDP stands at 99.58%, among the highest globally, raising alarms about a possible Canada housing crash if interest rates remain elevated or unemployment rises. Globally, total debt levels have reached an unprecedented $346 trillion in the first 3 quarters of 2025, with private and public sectors alike contributing to this ballooning figure. Public debt alone surging to $102 trillion according to UN estimates. Central banks are responding in ways that echo historical patterns, particularly the gold confiscation history of the 1930s. In 2024, central banks purchased over 100 tons of gold, the highest annual total on record. And in the first 3 quarters of 2025, they've added another 900 tons, with October alone seeing a net 53 tons bought, the strongest month of the year. This diversification away from U.S. Treasuries signals hedging against dollar collapse risks, as emerging economies like China and India lead the charge, pushing global gold reserves past previous highs. In Canada, the housing market shows signs of strain. Home resales are projected to decline 3.5% to 467,100 units in 2025. With over 12,000 unsold units accumulating and sales dipping 4.1% in the first half compared to 2024. Rising foreclosures and construction costs could precipitate a correction, mirroring past cycles where debt-fueled booms led to busts. These figures aren't isolated. They form part of repeating historical cycles, often spanning 80 years, where periods of expansion give way to debt accumulation, crisis, and reset. Think of the 1929 crash leading to 1933's gold confiscation, or the 1970s stagflation paving the way for 1980's neoliberalism. Today, with global debt at 94.7% of GDP and low and middle-income countries facing $741 billion in net external debt outflows from 2022 to 2024, the largest in 50 years, we're seeing echoes of those turning points. The U.S. debt crisis 2025 could force policy shifts akin to Roosevelt's interventions, while Canada's high household debt mirrors pre-2008 vulnerabilities. Central bank gold buying, at rates not seen since the 1990s, suggests preparation for a financial reset, where fiat currencies lose trust and hard assets regain primacy. These cycles remind us that no system, capitalist, socialist, or hybrid, escapes the gravity of unmanaged leverage. And as we head into 2026, the patterns point to increasing instability unless bold reforms intervene. Last 4 minutes. In wrapping up this cinematic exploration of capitalism versus socialism, here are 3 crystal-clear takeaways to carry forward. First, no economic system is inherently flawless. Capitalism excels at innovation but breeds inequality, while socialism promotes equity but stifles incentives. Success lies in balanced implementation. Second, historical outcomes hinge more on adaptable institutions, like strong rule of law and transparent governance, than on rigid ideologies, as seen in hybrids like Sweden's mid-century model. Third, unchecked debt accumulation, whether in capitalist markets or socialist plans, inevitably leads to crises, as evidenced by the U.S.'s $38.4 trillion burden and Canada's $3.07 trillion household debt in 2025. Now, a chilling warning. In a world teetering on the edge of financial reset, ignoring these repeating cycles could erode social trust beyond repair, sparking political upheaval and economic downturns that make the 2008 crisis look mild, especially with global debt at $346 trillion and rising. And so, let me pose this comment-forcing question. Given the mounting pressures of U.S. debt crisis 2025 and potential Canada housing crash, which economic hybrid do you think will prove most resilient in the next decade? A market-driven one with stronger social nets, or something entirely new? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this deep dive into financial history has gripped you like no other, here's your first strong call to action. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell here on Cash Historian so you never miss our next episode unpacking gold confiscation history or dollar collapse scenarios. Second, like this video and share it with a friend who's questioning the systems shaping our future. Together, we can uncover more truths on Cash Historian. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep exploring the patterns that define our world.